moment to go live.
Hey, good morning, everyone. We're kind of slow to start this morning because apparently Rumble needs to play catch up. So, are we ready, Rumble? Are we ready to rumble and tumble? Well, if we're not, that's too bad.
Jackson
right?
Barrett's in the chat on Rumble saying, Happy Friday to you, sir. So I think we are ready. Let's get it.
All right. So look, what's going on in the world this morning? I don't know. You don't know, but we're going to try to figure it out together. Mike shot me an interesting piece by Brian Kennedy just this morning in the American Mind, Warfare by Immigration. And really what it was about whether, in my opinion, we still have a notion of Western civilization that we're prepared to defend, cherish, and fight for. And it's an open question. On Friday mornings, I do a local radio spot here in Connecticut with a guy named Vinny Penn, and we got to talking this morning about Hamas and Israel, and we'll get to that this morning. And my position was that the Hamas attack was savage and way over the line, and Israel's entitled to a forceful response. But international warfare and the laws of international warfare always talk about proportionate responses, and what is proportionate. And so, there was a pause on the other side. Of the interview. It was by phone because Vinny and I are of a certain age. This is an inside joke with Mike Boyer, and we couldn't see one another. So I'm wondering, where's Vinny on this? And he says, I support Israel too, but I'm just not prepared to send our sons and daughters, into yet another international conflict. I don't want to be a global policeman, this, that, and the other thing. And it struck me all at once what this moment is in our history. And this is a moment of reckoning. There was a point in our history, in the history of recent world history, that was defined as the American century. Somehow we were a beacon to the world, and we regarded ourselves as such. We were self-confident, and we thought that we had values that could be imposed across international borders, and that they were values toward which the world should aspire, and with our assistance would. And we were confident enough, perhaps too confident, maybe comically confident, in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union, to believe that somehow the so-called neoliberal order, open markets and democratic institutions, had triumphed. And you'll remember the vainglorious essay by Francis Fukuyama, The End of History. Somehow history had come to a conclusion. We were going to have an era of global and international cooperation where there'd be open markets, open borders, and free exchange of ideas. And we'd live as one happy family under the tent of humanity, and Western civilization and its values would have triumphed in the end. Fukuyama didn't quite say that last piece. And then, of course, came the 21st century, and what I would call the wages of sin decade, which is where we live now. Again, regular listeners get tired of hearing me say this. That's okay. There are 8 million podcasts out there. You can find another. St. Augustine said, sin is love of the wrong thing, the city of man, the city of God. We have fallen in love with ourselves and our idiosyncratic images. And in the West, I think we've imploded. What began as pluralism, a respect for the ideals of other, has become a sort of worship of difference, a decision that everyone is of such great value that no matter what it is that a person expresses, if it's different, it's unique. And if it's unique, it's an expression of the human experience and therefore must be protected. I don't think so. I think the guy wandering over the border of Gaza deciding to kidnap and rape an old woman and murder a child is a savage. And I don't bleed anything other than red when I think about the notion of taking that sucker up against a wall and introducing him to the next life. And candidly, that's where I am. Because I do think that there are hard lines, hard boundaries in the world, and that there are some things that are acceptable and some that are not. And acts of terror, international terror of that sort, are not acceptable. And so what about this business of Western civilization? So Vinnie Penn, it's the Vinnie Penn Project. He's 960 WELI.
You've had Vinnie on the show at least once, I think.
I think we have, yeah. And but Vinnie was saying, I don't want to send our sons and daughters, and I said, I understand that, because what is it we'd be defending right now? I mean, we have lost a confident vision of ourselves. I mean, now what passes for national debate in the United States is who gets to use which restroom, and whether we should have transgender dancers at preschool story or kindergarten story hours. These are not ideals that inspire people to want to man the barricades to defend a vision of themselves. I think somehow the heart and the core has fallen out of our commitment to ideals, and as a result, as as Handel once put it in the Messiah, all we like sheep, and I think this reflects Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, all we like sheep have gone astray, and we no longer have a self-confident vision of who it is we are as a people among ourselves, to defend and to advance a better vision of life. All forms of life are now equal, and because all are equal and difference is to be cherished, we just have lost a sense of ethos. So I was thinking about this morning on the drive in. I was joking with Mike. I left my house 15 minutes later than usual. I now know when all the school buses are out. I believe that in Connecticut, the way clocks are set is school buses leave 5 minutes after I customarily arrive in the office. Since I was late today, I got behind every single one of them, but I digress. I remember as a young man, I taught at Columbia, and I taught in a program called Western Civilization.
I taught at Columbia.
What?
I taught at Columbia. No, go ahead.
I mean, it's just true. What do you want me to do? And this course was designed to acquaint students over the course of a year with great books: Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Politics, portions of the Ethics, Augustine's City of God. And over Low Memorial Library, there etched in stone were the names Cicero, Augustine, Plato, Homer. And I would walk into the library many days feeling unworthy of the mantle and feeling unequal to the task of mastering what had come before me. But yet I recognized the masters as people whose wisdom I should aspire to acquire, and sought to transmit such of it as I could understand in the classes I taught. And because I'm not a very wise guy, I stopped teaching at Columbia, Mike, and entered a more profane profession. Now I defend people who do hideous things. But the point is, at our major institutions, we no longer recognize core Western values as worthy of defense. We no longer recognize a canon of great books as possessing wisdom of ages that is worth transmitting to a new generation. Now we talk about grievances. I was on campus 4 or 5 years ago, and I saw that they put a banner over the names of the greats on the library, and over on that banner were written the names of contemporary authors, almost all of whom were complaining about the legacy of dead white men stifling the human spirit. Well, where's that got us, folks? I didn't know a lot about the Proud Boys when the Proud Boys trial began earlier in the year. So I had, or late last year, consumed most of the first part of this year. So I had to do a quick crash course, and I read a bunch. And one of the things I read is that an inductee into the Proud Boys was required to recite and apparently to believe an oath along the following lines: I am a Western chauvinist. I'm a proud Western chauvinist. I love Western civilization. That's basically what it meant, and prefer it to others. And I refuse to apologize for creation of the Western world. Prosecutors in the Proud Boys trial introduced that as evidence of their so-called white supremacy, as evidence that there was something wrong with them. And I sat in the courtroom and I marveled. I mean, what have we become? I mean, they're opening the barnyard to just about any animal that can waltz through the gates, saying meh, or oink 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 oink, and saying, your feces don't stink. There's room in the yard for everyone. The stable's big enough for us all, but it's not. And if we want to have and recognize the style and quality of life that we have come to assume, or that most of us were raised under, I think we have to fight for it. And so I'm looking at this piece in the American mind. I'm looking at what's going on in Israel. I was stunned to see news this week that Mayor Adams in New York is now thinking, the solution to the immigration crisis in the city is to pass out tents to the migrants.
And we'll get to that. I've got that queued here in a moment.
That they can stay in the parks. And I mean, have we lost our minds, Mike?
It's the weaponization of shame, Norm.
Well, yeah, tell me more about that, because you're on that, and you keep So I have a confession to make. The brains of this show is Mike. I mean, he's always laying stuff down, and I'm like, yeah, let's talk about this. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm thinking, man, he was right. What's this?
That's how my entire life has gone. I'm not hyperbolizing, and some of the people closest to me will joke about that with me. And I think my problem is that I'm not smart enough to communicate it well enough, or in more concise terms when I'm thinking of it. But
well, I think your Uncle Pat has nailed it. How many times did I say we are raising a generation of wimps? I mean, if you want to own that mantle, now would be the time to confess.
Well, and that's a necessary mechanism of what's going on there. Necessarily when a society is being conquered, those native members of that society that are most likely to put up a defense need to be disabled or otherwise rendered neutral in opposition to that effort. And that's what I mean about shame. So you talking about the introduction of the evidence of the credo of the Proud Boys by the prosecution in that trial. That only works if the recipient, which would be the jury, agrees that the mechanism of shame is effective in context. That is to say,
it is. Don't you think? I think.
But only, and I'm not hindsight quarterback, anything like that. I think that most of this game is mental. Everything that we're experiencing right now, because I still think that the Israel-Palestine war, notice that it's becoming Hamas versus Israel, although.
Yeah, and Hamas is not a nation state. It's a group. And it's largely a group that is devoted to terroristic ends. Let's be real about this. I'm looking at a note from Dawn. Proportional cannot mean equivalent or equal. That would be savagery. Israel has a right to defend itself and prevent future slaughters. But how? What strategy? I think the strategy that I see right now evolving is a harsh one, but it's consistent with international norms. And that is Israel is providing the Hamas as an organization has embedded itself within the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. And, its leadership structure is located in schools, it's located in hospitals. And so it wants to be able to say, you can't bomb the hospitals. That's a humanitarian crisis. Well, who's really creating the humanitarian crisis? If you've got your terrorist headquarters in the hospital basement, who's using whom? And is Israel supposed to sit back and say, you can strategize our destruction and plot the beheading of more children while from the safety of the basement, because on the first, second, and third floor, we're treating people with actual needs. So Israel is providing notice, clear out, because we're coming in to clear out Hamas. Hamas is saying, but there's nowhere for folks to go. Egypt isn't opening the border. Israel is massing troops on the border, and there are limited incursions. There were more last night. I presume they're going in on a targeted basis based on their intelligence to take out targets that they've identified as valuable to Hamas. There are going to be civilian casualties. What Israel has not done has been to carpet bomb Gaza from one end to the other and pave it over so that nothing can grow there. It's warned people to leave. It's working with the international community to provide aid to folks, and it is now engaged in targeted attacks on selected targets in order to take out Hamas's leadership.
The issue norm for Israel is necessarily that the public support of Israel, and we're talking about the younger public, we're talking about those 17 to 25
TikTokers.
They are out of lockstep with what has been for the last several decades co-alignment between the United States and Israel when it comes to policy in the region and economic policy more broadly across the Western world. I want to get back to this article because this article is great. Again, this is The American Mind's Warfare by Immigration. It's a salvo by Brian T. Kennedy. And I've got on the screen here, and I'm going to quote this for the audio only listeners or those who are watching but can't see because the font is a little too small. Quote, indeed, the very idea of the West has largely been abandoned. At its best, the West presented to the world an intellectual defense of freedom of the mind, freedom of religion, and the freedom of peoples to determine how they would govern themselves. It represented man's highest aspirations. It is the thing for which men crossed oceans. It was the thing for which men fought and died. Although these beliefs are still held by the American people, they appear to have largely been rejected by U.S. elites. Witness the rejection of American principles in the modern university and the administrative state that runs our country. The difference between the Cold War and today is that the Soviets and the Chinese could not, back then, contemplate a United States that would open its borders to millions of people from all over the planet, regardless of their country of origin or political views. There was always immigration, of course, including illegal immigration, but the Cold War required that new citizens were mostly of a certain kind, even if most came for economic reasons. The opening of the U.S. border today reveals an America engaged in a kind of national suicide.
I think he's right, and it's because we don't have a vision of ourselves. I'm reminded again of the Camp of the Saints, the genre.
The collective vision of ourselves is shame. Nationalism is to be nationalistic or to be jingoistic, right? Or to have any pride in a civic sense of what the United States is, and to point out that first paragraph in the section that I just read, to understand that the individual is the sovereign under the laws of the United States of America. The principles of our founding were premised on a recognition of man as the building block for Western society, that the individual was endowed by God with certain inalienable rights and freedoms, that the Constitution just merely recognizes those things. Communism, socialism, etc., these things that collectivize people's interests. And we see the material output of that, Norm. We see tent cities in New York City, right? We see a declining sense of dignity and civility across the United States through culture and otherwise. These things we're seeing these excesses that are objectively ugly, right? San Francisco's tent cities, right? Where now Mayor Adams is concerned with public health because of how are they going to adequately dispense with the sewage that would be created by 4,000
time to invest in porta potties in New York.
Month.
You heard it here first.
These things are. This isn't just rhetoric. This is real. There is a clear contrast between those who can even recognize the power that exists within themselves to cultivate a life of their own. Now, many people would say and shame me for having that sort of opinion, right? And the only way that they would be able to argue against the merit of those propositions would be to say that I was somehow advantaged by contrast to them or to some idea of someone else.
And that's where the cultural warfare needs to. We need to empower each person to engage in a form of hand-to-hand combat. When you are presented, Mike, with the notion that you can only embrace those values because of your white privilege, or your privileged upbringing or whatnot, at that very moment, the game has changed and it's become a game of gimme. And rather than seeking to engage in that debate on the merits, my response to those kinds of things is, what exactly is it that you want from me right now? In this transaction that we're having, what is it that you want? Well, I want recognition. I recognize your value as a person, but tangibly, what do you want? And usually it's money. Usually it is some sort of social program that will give them something for nothing. And usually it's a form of a collectivized version of what's good for humanity. And this is where, folks like Alex Jones begin to look prophetic.
And you also, when you talk about nothing scares me quite so much as a self-righteous mob, you've said this all the time, Norm. You say this that is a ubiquitous proposition for Law and Legitimacy, is the notion that the individual is really only pushed down by a group of people who have collectivized their own self-interest and are thinking as part of a larger whole rather than simply for themselves, right? And they are righteous in the brand that they established to do so. And that is CRT or whatever it's being branded, critical race theory, right? That is the crack version of cocaine, right? Somehow has been weaponized through social media now. And that was why I was talking about TikTok yesterday. I think the thread that I sent you last night, did you get a chance to read that? I forget the gentleman's name, and I think Tim Pool actually talked about that as well. Norm, are you there? Did he? Am I here? What is life? I need a heat check. Someone tell me that I'm still live and that Norm is not. Hello? Hello? Okay, it was Norm. We will wait for him to return. How is everybody this morning? We were going up. Hey, Gold Store, what's up? Jeff Rather. Dawn, you say, shame is a psychological construct, involves the feeling that I do not have a right to exist. I need to disappear, very dangerous as a social construct. America disappears. That's right. Because it's shame typically attached to achievement, right? You are here, Norm is frozen. We good. LOL, bros. All right. Self-inflicted blight upon ourselves. There he is.
I don't know. How is it that every time we reach certain themes, our audio begins to crap out? I begin to become paranoid, So I'm back in New Haven. These things aren't supposed to happen. But yet, here I am right next to Yale University, that font of sort of nihilistic despair dressed up as the celebration of difference. So where were we, Mike?
Well, I was on some sort of diatribe about, the nature of self versus the collective consciousness. Can we just pivot to this story from out of New York about Mayor Adams? Because you've already teased.
Yeah. So, New York is under, as so much of the United States is right now, I want to say unprecedented immigration pressures, but I'm not really a student of immigration. I mean, we've had waves of immigration in years past, but never in my lifetime. And, I'm 68 years old. I'm no spring chicken. Never in my lifetime do I recall a period where there has been such an influx of migrants that it has overwhelmed local infrastructures. And so whatever else has happened in our history, this appears to be unique, at least unique in our recent history. And so we've seen in New York, the mayor a call for across the board budget cuts of 5% in agencies in order to finance keeping folks in hospitals, and the folks or hospitals, hotels, in order to the tune of billions of dollars per year. And while there are homeless people wandering the streets of New York. So now recognizing that this is unsustainable, but yet the people keep coming. The mayor is talking about passing out tents to migrants, and so that the migrants can stay in parks. I remember years ago in the Occupy protest after the 2008 financial crash, I represented Occupy New Haven. And this was a group of people who created a tent city on the New Haven Green. And initially, everybody thought, they'll be there for a week or two and nothing will happen. Well, October turned to November and November turned to December, and we went into a chilly January, and 40 or so tents remained in place and a community evolved. And of course, that community was pushed off the green forcibly when it came time for Yale's commencement, because who runs New Haven? Yale. Okay. But the point that I learned was that while folks came to the tent city with an aspiration for utopia, we're going to demonstrate how to build a better world. They didn't. They simply replicated the world that we had. There were rapes within the tent city. There were thefts. The tent city attracted people who were rootless, many who were homeless, a significant number of whom had serious mental health issues. And it became a canvas or a nylon version of the concrete buildings that house the despondent souls in a downtown urban area. And now what we see in New York is Mayor Adams basically throwing in the towel. The people are coming. We don't have any place to put them, so we're going to give them tents and put them in Central Park. I mean, what does he think that's going to do to the quality of life in New York? And is the solution to say we've got to accept everyone that comes? I've seen this online. I've seen people writing, we must accept new migrants. This is the Jean Raspail problem. Again, I can't recommend enough reading Camp of the Saints. That book should be back in print. It's an allegorical tale about a wave of South Asian immigrants or migrants coming to France, and the French knew they were coming. They didn't know how to prepare. And should we stop them, or should we prepare to welcome them? And as a result, they did nothing. And when everyone arrived, they overwhelmed French social services and institutions, and the society crumbled. I would submit to you that Raspail's vision is not xenophobic and racist. It's realistic. And I think New York City is beginning to experiment with the sort of Raspailian hellscape that comes of not realistically confronting the limits on our resources and not resolutely defending what people in New York rightfully expect to be the standard of living they've fought and worked so hard to maintain.
I want to read this because there's two parts of this. Number one, the quote from Mayor Adams that I think is just really funny. And maybe I shouldn't think it's funny, but I do. So, quote, "The controversial idea comes as the mayor has been emphasizing that the city is past its breaking point housing asylum seekers. About 4,000 migrants have been arriving weekly. 4,000 migrants arriving into the city every week, according to officials. Adams reiterated that warning Tuesday. Quote, "I cannot say this enough. We are out of the room, and it's not if people will be sleeping on the streets. It's when," Adams said on Tuesday at his weekly off-topic briefing. At that same press conference, Adams noted that the city is looking at an alternative and arguably controversial new ways of housing migrants. Quote, "Yeah, outdoor spaces. Whatever space we can find. When you run out of space, whatever space you can find, we're going to use, and we want to do it as humane as possible," he said. "Believe it or not, tents are costly also." So Norm, the tents are not cheap. Tents are costly. Everything is costly. Adams said his administration, this is what makes me laugh. Adams said his administration is in talks with other countries on how best to provide services to migrants when they start sleeping in the streets.
Yeah, well, so there's
just to put this in context, the United States' most prominent, world-renowned municipal area, the banking capital of the largest economy on the planet, the mayor of that city is quoted as saying, "We are contacting other countries to consult with us on how to effectively be poor and dirty."
And thus the goal of global equity, until America is
we're too rich here. I don't know how to do this. Can you help us figure this out? Do you guys just shove them in tents? What do you do? What do you do when you have this?
Send them to America. That's what they do.
Exactly. No. We just got them out. We sent them I'm sorry, they're there.
Well, it's a brave new world dawning upon us, and I don't know that we're up to the challenge.
Well, this is what I wanted to talk about. So this comes from the Coalition for the Homeless, because I believe the Coalition for the Homeless was referenced in that article. But it's about the right to shelter in New York, and this is pretty concerning. But this has been something that has also been sort of bubbling beneath the surface, Norm, for the last several months, in anticipation of this sort of inflection point in New York City. Mayor Adams has suspended that right to shelter provision of New York law. And for anybody who's curious, the Coalition for the Homeless has a chronology of the 1979 lawsuit that actually began and initiated what became the right to shelter in New York. And it is really interesting, but it started with basically a drunken man who was homeless, and an attorney found him and litigated a case on his behalf, and the guy died a year before they won the case.
Well, I don't know. There are those who say, and that among the fundamental rights we have are a right to a home, a right to work, a right to sustenance, and of course, what the creation of every right creates a corresponding obligation on behalf of someone to honor that right. And so what we have in New York is a very ambitious right to shelter. And the word is out around the country that if you want guaranteed shelter, New York City or Massachusetts is the place to go. And as people arrive, these cities find themselves swamped and unable to meet the commitment. I don't know where it leads or where it ends, Mike. I mean, because I think our ideals are in conflict with reality, and reality usually wins over ideals. And so, do we salvage self-respect, or do we descend into something like violence, or do we come up with a new pragmatic solution in the form of an effective immigration policy?
Well, I mean, Convention of the States. We should have Mark Meckler back on. But in the meantime, we can just maybe imagine that Congressman Dean Phillips from Minnesota, heir to the Phillips Distilling Company fortune, who also loves Biden's policies, but thinks that we need just a younger Biden. Maybe he can fix this stuff, Norm.
Well, I mean, he's interesting to me because he's a Democrat and he's breaking rank and he's saying the quiet part out loud. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Sleepy Joe, he's got to go. I mean, we need somebody with both hands on the wheel and both eyes open. We don't want somebody driving. We don't want a backseat driver that we can't name and we can't know. And so as 2024 approaches and as the electoral season hops up, he's saying the quiet part out loud. Joe is not up to the task. People have reservations about the economy. They have reservations about where we're going, and it's time for a new generation of leadership. So let's keep an eye on him, and let's see if he has any success in the primaries to come. What's going to become of Trump? We haven't talked about him at all this half an hour. Is he really going to remain a viable candidate of sorts for 2024?
I don't know. I mean, I think, of course, he's a viable candidate to over half the country at this point.
Over half or about half?
No, over half. It's over half.
If
And
that's the case, then he can win.
well, but we know certain things about winning popular vote versus not. That's not how we elect presidents. And we've also discussed that, as recently as yesterday, efforts ongoing in places like Colorado with judges who want a very favorable and broad interpretation of state law that can subvert or take jurisdiction from federal application of federal law to keep him off the ballot. So I don't know, but what's interesting to me is that we have seemingly, I think Trump was quoted as saying in response to being questioned about the Ukraine war and the emergence of a new conflict in the Middle East, and does he think that they could win the war, who he would support in war? And he said he doesn't think much of it, only that he thinks of it in terms of death, and that it's sad that we have cultivated more death abroad.
And you've got the New York Post headline up here. It's Vietnam all over again. Not quite, but now we've got 900 more troops being sent to the Middle East in response to the Israeli-Hamas conflict, the crisis in the Middle East. I'm not even going to call it an Israeli-Hamas war. And what's going to happen is they're going to be there as advisors. They're going to be there as supportive roles. And then if you're Hamas and you really want to bring this whole thing down on its knees and get what you want, you start targeting Americans, because if you target Americans and produce a response, that'll draw your supporters, China, Iran, and others, to retaliate. And thus we tiptoe our way to a global conflict, all for the sake of a group of terrorists who think it's a good idea to kidnap women and children and execute people in public. To my mind, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Even in any just war theory, when someone engages in that sort of conduct and attacks you, you have a right to attack, destroy, and kill them. And I don't think that Israel should waste a moment's thought agonizing over the decision about identification and execution of every Hamas leader they can find. And I don't bleed one bit of sympathetic blood over that prospect, and I revel in it and support Israel's right to respond with force. I don't know that I'm prepared to send American boys, your son, my grandchildren, into that conflict to die for it. And that suggests a certain hypocrisy on my part.
I don't think it suggests hypocrisy at all. I think that you recognize that there is a war going on at home that is not kinetic in the traditional sense being that which people would most recognize or characterize as war. But what we are now finding is that our youth, Norm, are being programmed by hostile communist.
Yeah, and we meant to start off talking about that today and never got to it because your position is that TikTok and the algorithmic digitocracy that is largely being manipulated from abroad is finding ways to hit our like buttons in ways that are inconsistent with our national interest, and that China's manipulation of TikTok explains in large part why folks are marching in unison to a drum beat most of us don't recognize as in our interest. And so we're going to get to that next week. Mike, I give you a lot of credit for focusing on that.
Well, and that's why I'm not distracted by whatever the hell these states attorneys generals are doing against Meta right now in federal court. I don't think that they're not even shooting at the target. I think they're shooting at the other.
Yeah, I hear you. They're shooting. They're picking the low hanging fruit. So Dawn has been a steady drumbeat of realistic despair in her comments. I guess I don't know which one I'm looking at, YouTube, and I guess apropos our discussion of Israel's response to Hamas. Then what, Norm? She asks, and Dawn, I don't know what the then is. I do know that if somebody's banging on my door with a machete, threatening to behead me, I'm not going to worry about what happens if, what their children will think if I shoot them dead in their tracks. And I do think that Hamas and it has to own the savagery, and the Arab world has to own the savagery of what Hamas is engaged in. And I don't think we need to apologize for responding forcefully in defense of Western values. So I think let's neutralize Hamas. And then let's try to engage in a realistic discussion of what the solution is to Palestine and the Palestinian problem. I note, when the British mandate, when the Turkish Empire collapsed in the late 19th, early 20th century, and the British mandate came in as part of British colonialism and imperialism, let's use the right words, to govern the Middle East. And then in the wake of international conflicts in the mid 20th century, rather, the mandate collapsed. Israel was created in 1948, and there was a division of the former Ottoman Empire and British mandate into separate territories. No Arab state recognized the right of Israel to exist in 1948. They declared war on it the moment independence was declared, and vowed to drive Israel into the sea. And Israel was created by fiat, obviously, by international institutions. But rather than accommodate this new state in the Middle East, the Arab nations decided to destroy it. And I don't think they've ever come to accept the fact that Israel is there, and that may be part of a broader cultural clash or clash of civilizations. But Israel is an island of Western values in the Middle East, and it's fought to survive. I think the Palestinian people have been used as pawns by the Arab world. For 60 years or 70 years, they've been in refugee camps. I guess there are several million people in the Gaza Strip. Are you telling me that all the wealth and resources of the Arab world, a home could not be made for these people? Or is it more convenient to leave them there as a cancer on Israel's border and hope that things will fester, develop, and boil over as they have now, thus creating an international conflict that once again may imperil Israel's right to exist? And I would suggest, and I don't know where you are on this, Mike, but I believe and I support Israel because I do believe Israel is an outpost of Western values, and I do believe in the superiority of Western civilization. And I am a Western chauvinist, and I refuse to apologize for the creation of the modern world because I value the life that I have. I value the discussions we have. I value the principles that I see inherent in the United States Constitution, and I think they're under attack at home and abroad. And it's time to stand up and say enough.
Yeah, well, how I feel is what I've been saying pretty clearly. It's really difficult for me to focus on items abroad when I'm convinced. And I don't know that Dawn. This is obviously a really emotional topic and subject. I know, and am very close to Palestinian people in my personal life. And I've never received anything as a white Christian male, heterosexual. I've never received anything except respect and love from those Palestinian people. So I understand that what is going on here.
I don't think Dawn is criticizing the Palestinians. I think she's saying they're being used as pawns by others, and I think she's right. I think one of the great.
All I'm saying is that we have the conflict is so difficult for the average person to feel confident that they can speak about it accurately.
No. But here's the deal: by refusing to speak, you empower those who have their own vision.
I'm not refusing to speak. What I'm saying is that we have absolutely regarded that as being something contained to a nation somewhere else. Right?
Well, it's not.
And it's here. That conversation, that uncomfortable conversation, is now here. And it's here because people other than the Palestinians and people other than the Israelis have wanted it here. And that's the question that I am asking. How has this argument, this war, this existential war, been arbitraged on American soil, and through what means? And that is why TikTok needs to burn.
And that is why we'll begin next week with a fulsome discussion of TikTok and the landscape of American ideas and ideology and the technocracy that supports it. And I guess we'll have to pivot to a discussion of international conflicts and the role of China as an emerging power. Are we entering the Chinese century now that the American century is over? Or is there enough left in the American psyche that we can pick ourselves up by the bootstraps, recognize the history that created us, re-embrace the core ideals that define the lifestyle we so enjoy, and fight back? I'm inclined to want to fight, Mike, and I know you are. So let's talk about strategies for success next week. But first, we need to diagnose the cancer.
I just had a big DMX voice in my head come through.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in for another week. We end on a somber note, but it's a somber world. That's the way it is. Thank you for listening to Law and Legitimacy. We'll be back next week. Spread the word. We want to discuss what we can do to save the Republic, but first we need to figure out what ails it.
That's right. We'll be back Monday morning, 8 a.m. Thank you for everybody over on Rumble this morning. The chat was very live. We've had a tremendous amount of people compared to the average day. So we'd love to have all of you that are here on a more normal basis. Maybe not every day, but come through and hang out. Maybe
recently we haven't made it every day, but we're working on it.
Shh. Make sure you've liked the video if you're still here. If you're not subscribed, do that as well. And, not to be too burdensome, but I feel like I'm talking to different audiences. So if you're hearing this, I'm not asking you personally to do all of these things, even though if you did, you'd be an all-star. But if you're over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, whatever, leave 5 stars, leave a good comment. If you're on YouTube or Rumble or on X at LawPod Daily, make sure you've hit the notification bell so you know when we've gone live. And for those of you who have not joined over on Locals is largely, for the moment, it's been static. But what I do know is that when Norm and I communicate that we're not going to go live on a particular morning, that I make it a point to go to Locals and I hit the email feature. And so when I post, that notification will be given to you via email. So you're not going to YouTube or Rumble to figure out if we're going to be there or not. We also advertise that and broadcast that on X as well. So if we're not going to be live one morning and you have any doubt as to whether we're going to be going live, my assurance and promise to you is that I won't leave you hanging just guessing whether something went wrong. You will know that we're not going live.
He's no Joe Biden. Hey, listen, special shout out to Janice Dombrowski, who makes her appearance here in these chats for the first time under her own name. Janice is a friend who has provided many helpful comments along the weeks and months about what's going on in the world. Welcome, Janice. Welcome to Law.
See y'all later. Norm, I will talk to you in a little while.
You will.
Bye.